Welcome to Under the Basswood Tree with Basswood Counsel, a podcast where we bring you brief, valuable conversations and insights to help you navigate the complex world of business transactions. From cross-border deals to international tax structuring, we cover topics across all industries. Our team and colleagues will share their insights and provide practical tips on key issues for you and your business. Let's get started.
Thank you for joining another episode of Under the Basswood Tree, a Basswood Counsel built for what's next. I'm Klug of Basswood Counsel, and I'm here with Meritxell Mont of Auditors, and I'll let her give a brief introduction of herself.
Thank you very much, Chris, for the introduction. Such a pleasure being here. I'm a corporate lawyer here in Spain. I work for Auditors and Consultants. We are a firm both in Madrid and Barcelona. We are specialized in offering advice to international companies. I myself offer corporate law advice and tax advice for international companies and individuals which have some sort of interest in investing in Spain. So as I've said, very happy to be here and discussing these topics with you, Chris.
Wonderful. We're very lucky to have you and appreciate your time. Meritxell and I are going to do a series, and the series is going to be based on either U.S. companies going to Spain to start some operations or sell, or we'll see what it is. And in reverse, we'll look at Spanish companies looking to come to the U.S. and do whatever operations. And then we'll move into individuals moving into Spain or individuals moving from Spain to the U.S. And today we're going to start with U.S. companies going to Spain, and we'll start with Meritxell. What are some of the key factors that you see in companies looking to enter Spain, and why Spain is a great location?
Well, at the end, Chris, Spain is a great location because, first of all, it's in the European Union. So not only you're accessing the Spanish market, you're accessing the whole European market. So just to give you an idea, it's more than 400 million of consumers that you are able to reach when you're entering to one of the European countries. So that's very positive point. Also, we are a very, very competitive economy in Europe. The costs are not as high in other Western European countries, for example, yet the infrastructure is great. We have great talent in many different cities of the country, very used to working with international companies. So that's also a pro point for US companies into this market. And also, as I've said, I think the key point here is Spain, it's a gateway to Europe and to the whole European market.
Yeah, I think you mentioned some of the reasons why Spain and maybe not some of the other European countries, but maybe just a highlight. I heard one, great workforce, slightly lower costs, but what are some of the other highlights?
I would say these are the main ones. Also, the infrastructure. This is something that many companies, for example, which are on the logistics or in the transport industry, are highlighting to us that it's a great country in this sense. Infrastructure in Spain, it's huge. For companies in this industry, it's a very, very way to start in the European market. Also, we have a lot of interest of technology companies, for example, in areas such as Zaragoza, Barcelona, and Madrid. Renewable energy companies, they are also seeing Spain as a gateway and as a very good market to establish operations as well. So I would say these are, as you have said, I would reduce it to very few points, which are actually very important. Very good workforce and talent, slightly reduced cost compared to other Western European countries, great infrastructure, and as I've said, you are gaining access to not only one country, but to many other different countries and many other consumers and many other opportunities to develop your business.
Wonderful. Well, what do you say that the main sectors are in Spain that you see companies trying to work with or come into Spain to enter into?
Well, as you may know, traditionally Spain was attracting many companies in the tourism and the real estate industry. These were like the traditional industries for international investors. Nowadays, as I've said, we have other industries, also depending on the region of Spain, they are thriving more or not. But technology companies, logistics companies, and renewable energy companies, they are setting up in Spain operations because the opportunities are huge in here.
Yeah. And if a company, a U.S. company, let's say, is thinking about going to Spain, what are the first questions they should be asking, or what should they be thinking about?
Well, the first question that I always ask is, what's your plan? Okay, and I guess It's the same when we are going to the US as a Spanish company. It's really, which is the plan? Because that's going to change how to structure it, how to start, what are the obligations, what are the things to take into account. I'm sure that is exactly the same when you're thinking about establishing a company or a business in the US. And actually, it's something, it's as simple as that. When you're expanding into another country, you have to be thinking about the same things. Like, what is my plan? What is the development that I want to have? How do I want to start? So I think this is the first question that as a businessman, you have to think about.
Yeah, I mean, most of my clients say they just want to make money. They don't care how they do it now. They want to do it right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're 100% right. The company's got to know why they're going cross borders. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, Spain's great. Want to travel there. It's a great life. But there's got to be a reason. And there's got to be a business purpose to it. The business owner obviously can't be, let's just go to Spain. It should work out, right? That's not a good plan.
Exactly. You have to think about this, like the basic question, which is the plan? Okay, what do you have in mind when you are thinking about expanding to Spain? I ask you the same. For example, if I'm a Spanish company and I'm looking towards expanding into the US market, what would be the first thing that you would ask me? Probably it's this, like how you want to start, right?
Exactly. The US, we have many states, but I think it's the same factors. Where in Spain? Is it about the cost of the workforce? Because I bet if you're in Madrid as opposed to countryside, there's going to be a different cost. And in the US, states vary drastically in what it costs to employ people. What's the minimum wage? What do they have to offer as far as resources? Where are the educated people all over the place, but they're more concentrated in certain areas? So it's, as far as your business, what is you're looking to do? And I bet Spain has some of the same characteristics as when coming to the US.
Well, I think it's similar, but that's something very interesting about the US, I think. And something that a Spanish company that is looking towards expanding to US has to really think about, which is what you have said, where in the US, because it really changes a lot from one state to the other in terms of cost, I guess also in terms of tax regulations, I don't know. In Spain, it does change in terms of cost, maybe, and as I've said, access to infrastructures or so, depending on the industry, can be more interesting setting up in Madrid rather than, I don't know, south of Spain, in Malaga, for example. But out of that, it doesn't really make a change, for example, in terms of taxes and legal issues and so on and so forth, if you're a company. But it does change in terms of access to infrastructures and other facilities. So I think that's a very interesting point that the US has.
Yeah, I mean, what you'll find in the US, especially with the states, is we're a high consuming country. So as far as others, a lot of people have decent income and they spend a lot, which makes for good. And a lot of times where the people with the most money live is not necessarily the cheapest. So like, you're not going to go typically start some kind of manufacturing plant in New York City. What you would want to do is sell into New York City, but maybe manufacture in North Dakota. And you're correct with the state laws. They're all different. It's income tax rates are anywhere up to 13% somewhere in California, down to nothing in other states. You got sales tax, which is probably similar to your VAT. So with that, as I said, you might manufacture or produce in one state, but maybe you have your sales office somewhere else, or you're selling nationwide. But something obviously to plan for. In Spain, what are the kind of things to think about if you're going to hire employees?
Well, that's a very good question, actually. First of all, when you're going to hire an employee that resides in Spain, you must really think about first, which is the role of the employee, okay? Because we may face the risk of creating a permanent establishment if we are not yet setting up a company in Spain, just as an example. And also, which is the way that we're going to be hiring this employee. I think these are the first two questions that you have to think about. Because something that I don't know if you're aware of, but for example, the employer of record in Spain, it's not permitted, okay? So that's something very popular, I know, in the US, in the UK, in other countries, but in Spain, it's not permitted. So, for example, if you're an American company, you want to hire someone in Spain, there's a way to do it as a compliant way, but doing the employer of record shouldn't be an option. For example, this is something that we see a lot because at the end of the day, the world nowadays, it's international. And many companies abroad are hiring people in Spain and vice versa, or maybe someone from an American company is relocating to Spain because they want to start maybe investigating the market a little bit and they want to be on the field. And they are using employer of record companies, that's not correct from a legal perspective, and you should be doing a whole different, not really structure, but way of doing it so you are compliant with the tax office, with the Social Security of Spain, and everything. So these are the two main things when you are going to hire someone in Spain, the US.
Okay. And so if you're going to start hiring people in Spain, it's a good time to, I would guess, to think about, do you want an entity in Spain so that takes the payroll responsibilities? How does that work?
Well, as I've said, payroll has to be on the responsibility of the employer. Okay, so that would be the American company. The way of doing is we register this company in Spain as a non-resident employer. Okay, so that's why I've said that one of the first questions that you have to think about is which is the role of the employee. Because if the employee is not a director of the company or a high executive or someone in sales, for example, there's no risk of creating a permanent establishment, so no real tax liabilities in Spain. You can be registered, as I've said, as a non-resident entity that we call, which is just for payroll purposes. It's just so that you can pay the payroll to your employee in Spain. The employee can be hired here and paying the social security contributions and everything, but as I've said, in a compliant way.
Okay. And in Spain, do employees have set rights to their job? Do you have to give them certain notice if you're going to fire them? In the U.S., the reason I asked you, in the U.S., usually unless your employment agreement says otherwise, your employment at will, meaning you can be fired at any time. So how does that work in Spain?
Well, this is something that I always tell my clients, that they have to be very open-minded, okay, and patient with the Spanish regulations, okay, because it's very different with American regulations in this sense. In Spain, as well as in other European countries, you cannot fire, for example, someone from one day to the other. There are different periods of anticipation that you have to respect. Otherwise, there are economic or other consequences to the employer. Okay, sometimes it's worth it. Okay, it's something that we always try to assess the client on which is the best strategy to get rid of an employee, for example, if it's not doing well for the business. But it's just that you have to be very aware that it's a completely different system. In Spain, as I've said, as in other European Union countries, the state, okay, and the regulations, they protect a lot the employee. Okay, and as I've said, there are always strategies and ways of doing things, so it can be good not only to the employee, which it's always like that because of the regulations, but also to the business person. So just thinking that, be open-minded, be patient, because it's going to be very different to what you are used to, but there are ways of doing it, and trust your lawyer and your advisor always on this.
There you go. Okay, I mean, that's always good advice. And are there other perks that are statutorily or regulatorily required for workers, like time off, maybe maternity, paternity leave, anything like that?
Yes. So here in Spain, a part of the dismissal and firing process that I've been explaining a little bit, there are many rights to the employee. Okay, so in Spain, the general working hours are 40 hours per week. Okay, just to take that into account. And afterwards, the specifics, for example, days off and vacations, specifications regarding your salary, it depends on what we call the collective agreement, okay? It's not a general law that we have in Spain and this applies to everyone. It's not like that, okay? We have basic rules that have to be followed, but then each collective agreement, which depends on the industry, the region of Spain, the city, the position. Sometimes, if the company is very big, can also have a specific company and one collective agreement for themselves. Okay, so it really depends on that. So if you're a US company that is, imagine setting up a company in Spain and is going to be hiring employees and people around, you have to tell your advisor which is the position, which is the industry, and where are the roles going to be taking part. Because then we identify which is the collective agreement, and there we can see which are going to be the specifications that you are pointing out, like vacations, days off, the schedule, how it works, for example, in terms of dismissal, for example, or resignation of the employee. Yep. It also changes depending on the collective agreement and these type of things. How does it work in the US, by the way? Is it similar or not?
Not at all. Now, I mean, if you don't give any days off, no one's going to work for you. But realistically, I mean, Most will give give a certain number of the federal holidays, but there's no set. You don't necessarily have to give maternity, paternity leave. You don't necessarily have to give a set amount of paid time off or anything like that. Now, you do have to, there are some minimum wage standards where you have to pay your employees a certain amount. There's also some minimum wage. We have a 40-hour basic work week, and if you're not an exempt employee, you get bonuses if you have to work beyond that. But we do, unless the employment agreement says you're contractually entitled to work this long or some amount of time, or there's some process, no one's entitled to their job in the U.S., so you can be fired. Now, when you get into government workers, just on one side, if they've been in a certain position for a number of years and they're considered tenured, and then there's a due process. But us in the private sector, we don't deal with that much. So it would be different from what a U.S. company is used to, but I think that's exactly why we need good advisors to guide us through that for a company. Because yes, there might be some different regulatory requirements. In my mind, businesses that have something they can sell worldwide are better off being in multiple jurisdictions. And really what you're talking about is how do we do it in a compliant manner? And if you're making that investment, if you're going to enter the European market and Spain's a great location to start, or you just want to be in Spain, it's an investment to do it right from the start, because I take it that if you don't do it right, penalties can probably be large, I would think.
Exactly. There are many inspections, audits, and consequences such as penalties towards these sort of practices. And unfortunately, they go towards international companies, because if they are not well advised, they might be doing things wrong or not compliant enough. It's very interesting because this difference, as I've said, American companies coming to Spain, they are always very surprised by how our system works, because it's very strict, everything very well established, as I've said, we have the collective agreement, the general law, and everything. But if I'm a Spanish company and I'm expanding to the US, I think it's the completely different impression. Like, everything is much easy for the company, and that's a positive point as well. I think if we have a Spanish company that is looking towards expanding to another country, the US in this term, is going to be facilitating things for the employer in this case.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think in thinking about, along with hiring employees and what that might entail, if a company were just to sell into Spain remotely, not actually have a physical presence in Spain, what are some of the considerations there?
It's complicated. Okay, this type of cases, because if you're selling remotely in Spain, it might give the impression that, well, I'm doing it from the US, it's fine, never mind, right? But there are many things to consider. Okay, for example, something that we've seen with many third countries, especially, for example, the UK after Brexit. Now it's considered a third country, it's not European Union anymore, and it's something that we've seen a lot, and it's the same case for the US. If you're selling products in Spain, you need, for example, an insurance company for the products, okay? Insurance companies are going to be more expensive if you're a third country company than if you are a European company. So, for example, that's one of the reasons, believe it or not, that many companies are setting up subsidiaries in Spain if you are selling products in Europe, because it's easier for them to deal with insurance companies, to deal with the logistics companies as well. Also, depending on what you are selling, the regulations regarding the product may be different, so it makes it easier if you are doing everything from the field, from Spain in this case. So it's just a way of lowering your costs at the end of the day. And as I've said, also something that you pointed out before, from a commercial perspective, also towards the consumer or towards other companies that you might be working, doing it from a Spanish or European company always looks better and gives maybe more security to the other party than if you're doing it from another company which is located in the US in this case.
So what would you say if a US company wanted to advertise in English to a Spanish customer base? Would that work out well?
Well, you can try. And at the end, depending on the city, Spain is becoming very, very international. We have many Americans, for example, living here. So
no, I think it's fine. I bring it up as a joke, but I think it's one of those things that it's not just you have the right product. There's a cultural fit a lot of times when you cross borders. And if you think the way you're advertising just in the US will work in Spain, it may not work, that they're just going to buy the product because the product's good. That's not necessarily true. If you touch on cultural, if you kind of don't respect the culture by simple things as advertising in Spanish or whatever you put on the product is in Spanish. It doesn't look very well, in my opinion, to the consumer base.
Well, it doesn't look well, and sometimes it's also a regulatory matter regarding advertisement. So, as I said, it's important to take all of this into account. Also, if you are dealing with other companies to sell your products, as I've said, they are going to feel much more secure. They are working with a European company rather than an American company in this case. I have clients, for example, they are working with Amazon because they are selling products, online. They're in the e-commerce industry. It's much easier if you're doing from a Spanish or European company rather if they are doing it from their company in their home country, in the US or wherever it is. So that's also something to consider. So at the end of the day, I think it's a thing about cost, the image that you give, that you were pointing out. And also this, if it's going to be much more reliable for your clients and your collaborators or not, which most of the cases, I mean, it's easier to work and you feel more secure working with someone which, it's close, than someone which is in another country, like thousands and thousands of kilometers away.
Yeah, and I think if you start an office, a manufacturing plant, whatever it might be, and you bring Spanish workers to it, you're employing people. Now you kind of build some loyalty out of the base that then they go and tell the people in their circle that, hey, this is a good company. They treat us well. The product's good. I think that's also helpful, even though it sounds like if you start a sub company in Spain that you have some savings on insurance and some other things. Maybe overall it's a little more to hire people, pay for a facility, but that presence should also develop more business typically. Is that kind of part of it as well?
No, that's correct. That's totally correct. And something that you mentioned before, which I really like, is that if you want to do business globally in different countries, you have to have some sort of base in these countries because otherwise it gets very complicated. It's very complicated to deal with your business and things that are happening and operations that are happening in another country. Nevertheless, for example, in Spain, which is pretty far away from the US, for example. So it doesn't make sense, I think, nowadays, being easy at the end because it's easy to expand into other countries, to not have operational base in the country in which you are selling or you are offering your services or your products or whatever.
Yeah. And maybe touch on a couple of more points before we wrap up on this one. But I think what would be the factors? Because you said Spain's a good gateway to the European Union. In a U.S. company looking to expand throughout Europe, but setting up its headquarters in Spain, what are the advantages there?
Well, setting up the company in Spain, as I've said, it's easy, okay? It's less expensive than in other countries. And as I've said, it's going to be very easy to deal afterwards on the day-to-day basis with the business. Okay, it's true that for you, for example, the US businesses, they feel European countries are very bureaucratic. But the truth is that it depends on the country. There are countries that are bureaucratic or more complex than others. Spain is not that much complicated. So if you're a business person, also you're looking towards simplicity when you are dealing with your business. So this is something, for example, to consider. And also you have many other options. Instead of setting up, for example, a subsidiary or a company in Spain, you can also have, for example, branch. You can have a permanent establishment. You can have a non-resident entity, as I've mentioned before. So you have many possibilities to start doing things in the Spanish market that I think is giving a lot of assurance to an American company.
Okay. And another way to enter the Spanish market would be to acquire a Spanish company. What are some of the considerations there and the advantages of going that route instead of trying to start from scratch or start fresh with a new company?
Well, acquiring a company that already exists in Spain, it's always a positive move. And if you have the possibility of doing so, I think it's something to really take into account. Why? Because depending on the industry, it's always going to be easier. For example, if it's an industry or it's a company that is very highly regulated, for example, energy or focused to consumers or medical, for example, companies, these sort of things are very regulated in Spain. So if you're acquiring the company, you forget about getting the licenses and the specifications regarding this. So That's positive. And also that you are setting up operations, but not really, because the company already exists, already is in the market, already has its employees, already knows how the market works. So you're not starting from scratch during this expansion. So it's a positive move, very wise, as long as you know the company very well, you carry out a very well done due diligence process with the company, and both parties are happy to proceed. If that's the case, I think it's a very, very good move.
All right. And as part of the due diligence process, I know the corporate attorney would be involved. Who are the other key members of that team?
Well, I think the basic, it's always a corporate lawyer, tax lawyer, and tax advisor to review the whole taxation of the company, because Spain is simple, but still it's in the European Union, so tax can get a little bit complicated. So that's super important to be very wise when analyzing the tax position of the company. Also accountants, financial advisors to review the financials of the company. And of course, as you can imagine after what I've explained of the strict system that we have regarding employment law, you need to have an employment lawyer or advisor to review also that everything is in order regarding the employees and regarding contracts, dismissals, and everything.
Okay. Well, very insightful. I think this is a great conversation. We've got great insight on what a U.S. company should think about in going to Spain. What are some of the initial factors in determining how you structure, how you go about it? So maybe we'll close out here, but Meritxell, any final comments?
Well, I think at the end, the most important thing when you are looking towards expanding, in this case to Spain, is to really think what's the plan on this expansion, to be open-minded, because at the end, it's a whole different jurisdiction, whole different system, and you have to really have good advisors to support you on the process, because I think this is super important. Spain, it's a very interesting market. It's a very interesting country for companies. That's why, for example, our most large investor that we have here in Spain, it's the US. Many US companies are establishing subsidiaries and branches in Spain, and that's for a reason at the end of the day. So I think that's something that I would highlight after this conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think you're right. You need to have a company that's looking to enter another market, or even in their regular country, you need to have the right advisors. You need to be able to trust who you're working with, and they're going to make things so much easier and allows that company to focus on running their business and not worry about legal, regulatory, tax, and other risks that might be out there. So again, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining another episode of Under the Basswood Tree. We look forward to having you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. To stay up to date with the latest legal insights and Basswood events, please follow us on our Basswood Counsel LinkedIn page and visit our website at www.basswoodcounsel.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll speak to you next time.